piece. We're going mainstream. Everybody's gonna eat. We're going mainstream. All my family is sing. See you on Main Street. We're going mainstream.
From Wall Street to Melrose Avenue,
We're going mainstream.
venture capitalists to athletes to
We're
creators
going mainstream.
to the person who's collected trading cards
We're going mainstream.
in a collision of culture and finance.
We're going mainstream.
Welcome back to the Alt Goes Mainstream podcast. Recently, AGM partnered with Pangea to bring together a group of executives in private markets and wealth management in London for a live AGM podcast featuring Cheri Belski of T. Rowe Price. Cheri is the global head of product at T. Rowe Price, where she's responsible for setting the vision for T. Rowe Price's product development and their strategy in private markets. Cheri also chairs the Product Strategy Committee and is a member of the Investment Management Steering Committee. She's also a vice president of T. Rowe Price Group, Inc., T. Rowe Price Investment Services, Inc., and T. Rowe Price Associates, Inc. She's been with T. Rowe Price since 1997. Cheri and I had a wide-ranging conversation on private markets, how traditional asset managers have approached adding private markets capabilities, and what the future holds for private markets. Please enjoy this fascinating conversation with Cheri Belski.
We're going mainstream.
I'm glad that two Marylanders, we both live in Maryland, Cheri in Baltimore, myself right outside of DC. I'm glad we could do a podcast in London together.
I agree. First time meeting in person in London.
Exactly. And we have a lot to talk about on the evolution of wealth, traditional asset managers getting into alternatives as you are. So I'm excited to do that. Just really quick, I'm Michael Sidgmore, co-founder and partner at Broadhaven Ventures, early stage fintech VC. We do a lot in alts. I was an early employee at iCapital before that. And I also have a podcast called Alt Goes Mainstream. I've done about 100 podcasts and write a newsletter all about private markets and the intersection of alts and wealth, which Cheri is very well versed in and is thinking about daily as T. Rowe, one of the largest traditional asset managers, is really thinking about how to, and already has thought about how to get into the alt space. So would love to hear a bit about your background, the work you're doing at T. Rowe, and also how your career arc, now focusing a lot on alts, has kind of mirrored the trajectory of T. Rowe as a firm.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So I'm the head of global product at T. Rowe Price. It's a $1.5 trillion active asset management firm. In my current remit, I've been there for about 3 years, and we have roughly 150 investment strategies that show up as 400 products in the market across 13 vehicles. And my team cuts across the globe in North America and APAC. So really, we're focused on bringing our best investment capabilities aligned with whatever we're hearing from client needs to the market by way of multiple different products. Alt certainly being one of the newest capabilities that we're thinking about, and more recent endeavors are happening at the firm right now. Prior to that, just as far as a career arc, I was telling Michael that I had started in the political realm actually before coming to T. Rowe Price. And so I had worked for several senators, believing I would be on a path to foreign diplomacy. And with the last senator I worked for, I realized I didn't like the politics of politics. There wasn't really the purpose-driven nature that I had expected there to be, which is really what I was seeking. And so I made a pivot from DC to the backyard of Baltimore and joined T. Rowe Price. And at the time, I didn't even know what they did. And it was really just taking a leap of faith to a firm that was hiring a lot and then figuring it out from there. And as I joined, I was able to really move around the firm and play a part in addressing individual investors' needs, plan sponsors and record keeping needs, because they have a record keeping business too. Then also did quite a bit to help ultimately build our distribution business direct to financial advisors. We had been working with home offices for 25 years, but hadn't gone previously direct to their advisor. So about 15 years ago, I was part of helping design and create that. So the bulk of my career was in distribution. And 3 years ago, I was asked to take over a global product to bring that lens to how we think differently about product.
Well, now your diplomacy is in how do you decide how to build, buy, or partner in the alt space. So I want to start with, why would a traditional manager like T. Rowe decide to get into alts, and why alts now?
I mean, first of all, why not? I think for us, part of what we're always trying to do is think of where we can identify and invest in places that'll help our clients thrive. We see alternatives as another capability to add to our investment platform to help our clients do that. Why now, and how do we think about getting here? I think like many other firms and what you're seeing in the industry right now is there's an opportunity to use alternatives as a diversifier in client portfolios. And obviously it offers some optimized returns in different ways than other products do. So I think that's attractive to us. We had thought about it several years ago, and that's when we started really building the case for how could we win the right to win in the market. Several years ago, when we were initially exploring it, it was more of an institutional play. And what we were finding is those players had a preference to more of the specialist boutiques and specialist firms. So we weren't quite there. It was a little bit of a miss and hard to find those buyers. But over time, we continued to have belief, and we started to hear from more of our advisor retail channel that they were growing interest in how might we do this. And that's kind of the intersection point of where we really said, okay, let's get into this and figure out how to do it.
How did you start getting into alts?
So when we were first doing our long-term business strategy, say, okay, we've decided we need to get in. Now it was about how do we do it? And that's kind of where the build buy partner comes in is, can we do this on our own? I think about each of those distinctly in instances like this, where if you're going to build, really that's because you already have the capabilities, you have the talent, and you have the resources. So it becomes an exercise of prioritization, sequencing, and maybe stopping something to put this in front of it. That was not the case for us. We really quickly concluded that we don't have all those component parts to keep pace with the opportunity. For us, that first opportunity was in private credit. How do we go there and what would be required? Build on our own was off the table. Generally speaking, think about partnerships to say if there's one of those components that you're light on and needs some coverage to close a gap, maybe you look for a firm that has that expertise and then partner with them to get that expertise. So kind of what you're seeing with like KKR and CAF Group. And then buy, being the last one we would go through, obviously has cost associated with it. But really the case for acquisition comes down to if you're seeking a capability that you don't organically have and or want speed to gain that, acquisition can be the place to go and build. And for us, that was the clear answer. So then we quickly pivoted to, okay, so what are we going to seek in someone that we want to acquire to be able to then enter alts in a meaningful way?
Oak Hill Advisors.
That was Oak Hill Advisors about two and a half years ago now.
What was the biggest challenge with integrating Oak Hill into a culture that was both traditional long only asset management and also the distribution of the product as well? Because it's a different product for your salespeople to distribute to the intermediary or wealth channel.
As far as integration, I would say overall it was pretty seamless. Now, certainly we had to work through some things, but in our quest to make sure we thought about acquisition in the right way, we wanted to make sure that, number one, we were partnering and acquiring someone who would bring the capabilities we need and would match our brand halo. It was known in their sphere, was respected, and had outlasted performance. And they have 30 years of proven track record. So they kind of checked the boxes there. Culture was a really big thing for us too, which was you don't see T. Rowe acquiring firms very often. And in fact, this is only, I think, the second or third time we've ever done that acquisition. Part of that is because we're really astute about we're not going to become this overly boutique shop with many different players. But also we have to find the right cultural match, because I do think part of acquisition is it becomes really disruptive to your firm overall if you don't do that well when you're integrating. So when we were seeking out who to acquire, what resonated with us was culturally the way they think about their investment process, the way they think about how they do things for clients was very much aligned to how we do it. It felt very brand additive, but also it was cultural adds. So when it came to integration, that piece was really nice. I would say the learnings were you're combining two organizations, Oak Hill Advisors, which being in the alternative space, nimble, speed, the pace is really rapid, and there's low entries to barrier to get things to market. Joining with a firm, T. Rowe, 80 years old, traditional, there's a lot of gates to go through with legal compliance operations. And so the initial integration to getting things done, I think there was some speeding up for us to get faster and slowing down for OHA to meet our pace. And so those were the types of things we had to work through. But culturally, it was pretty seamless.
We talk about build, buy, or partner.
Yeah.
Firms can do one, they can do all three. Is one generally a stepping stone to the next? Is buying, once you have that learned experience with Oak Hill, is that a stepping stone to then building or doing something else? Is that how a lot of firms like yours and others are thinking about this in the traditional space?
I think oftentimes one does lead to the other. It certainly doesn't negate going to one of those others. But in our minds, it was for opportunity and capability, let's buy, learn, and then see, could we then build or potentially partner on the next, because we're not going to stop at just private credit. We want to continue our path into the alternative space. And so it is very much as you described. We're using this acquisition to get into market, to get some brand recognition that we're in this market, and also prove that we can successfully acquire an alternatives firm and have success to attract other potential buyers or partners, but also to learn for ourselves and what capabilities we have that we could do it ourselves as well.
How much is this move into alt driven by advisors organically telling you, hey, I want alternatives options with T. Rowe. I buy other products from you already. And your sales forces that are in the field are saying, hey, we need to provide solutions to you. We know you want less solutions, not more, in terms of partners and platforms to work with. And they want to get alternatives from you versus you're saying, hey, look, as a business and as asset management evolves, we need to add these types of capabilities.
There's definitely that component. And I think in anything we do pay attention to what our clients are seeking so that they can achieve their overall outcomes. It kind of goes together. It's not solely driven by the client. I think in our own way of continuing to evolve, because I think given the pace at which our industry moves, to stand still and be who you always were is going to be the death of your firm, right? So you have to keep always thinking ahead and evolving. And for us, it was the combination of we recognized that we needed to evolve and add some capabilities. And we also knew it was going to address some client needs because they were bringing it up. So it was the marriage of those two things that really gave us the chance to then unlock how we get in there. And now it's really about what do we need to do to bring them the rest of the way. So it's one thing to say I'm interested in, for a client to say to us, we're seeking and interested in what alternatives can do to diversify our client's portfolio and get that return locked in. But how do you help them do that? And how do you help them convince their client to do it too? Because it's both of them, not one of them, that you have to educate.
Talk about that, because I think that's a great segue into brand and education tied to brand. How do you think about the importance of brand in the alternative space? And how do you, as a traditional asset manager, think about building that brand in alternatives for both advisor and end client?
There's two ways we think about it. Brand is very important. I think it's a lot of times what people anchor to, even just generally in consumption. People go to what they know by brand first, and then they'll try something they don't know by brand second. So I think brand becomes a starting point. I think for advisors and their end clients, they're less familiar with the alternative brand type specialty firms. They're more familiar with us, for instance. So I think it's actually our current brand is an advantage in that if people are seeking that out, they're more likely to ask us, do you have this? And can I buy it from you? And then we need to rise to that challenge. What we're doing with Oak Hill Advisors is a great example of how we came together on brand. We are also trying to get more out there so that people beyond those that we're working with every day also know that we're in the business. And how do you get those additional buyers? And we, conversely, are lesser known there, but OHA is more known. So there's this brand halo on both sides where OHA, leveraging our global distribution network, can get more of their brand pulled through to advisors across the globe through our distribution and referral system. And we can get our brand pulled through them as they go into their market with clients that they're closer to. When it comes to actually creation of product and putting it in market, we've had very lengthy conversations about how do you brand it? Is it T. Rowe with OHA? Is it just OHA? So I think that becomes really important depending on your market, who you're targeting, and where you have the best chance of winning.
What has been more effective in that sense when you think about brand? Is it branded as T. Rowe because people know T. Rowe, or is it branded as the specialist alts manager who has a capability and reputation in that specific strategy?
Yeah, in this first endeavor, it's branded as Oak Hill. And that was somewhat by design because, again, like on all the content, things like that, it's branded as Oak Hill, but it's driven by Rowe Price. So we enter the conversation is where our brand comes in versus in print and media on this one. And that was our entry point into how we position it. And I would say because of their name recognition with the current buyers that are interested in private credit alternatives, having the OHA kind of front run our brand has been more effective. And it's also been effective in pulling us through with them in conversations to understand that we're the partner with them. So we're starting to get that brand exposure in alt space where we wouldn't have been before.
You're bringing up a really interesting point there as we see consolidation in the alternative space where alternative asset managers may themselves, I think if they're not the largest firms, they're going to have to think through their own distribution strategy. Not everyone can hire 300 people and have a distribution team focused on wealth. So I think that middle middle being still very large, multi-billion dollar AUM manager really has to think about, okay, do I try to shoot for the stars and become a $100 billion type plus firm? Or do I partner with or join forces or get acquired by a larger firm that has distribution capabilities? Do you see a lot of the smaller firms who are specialists say, okay, let's find ways to work together, whether it's partner or end up getting acquired by a firm like yours because you can add distribution capabilities to their businesses?
Do you believe the numbers that Cerulli and others have put out about the opportunity that the retail advisor marketplace can have for alternatives, which is very sizable? I think one of the quickest pathways to get through some of the barriers to entry for traditional alt shops or specialist shops would be to partner or be acquired by a traditional asset manager, because we have this advantage of certainly distribution force. We have close to 500 sales associates across the globe that can be leveraged in distribution. We have the relationships. We have access to the gatekeeper. In many cases, we're already on their platforms on preferred lists. So there's a lot of gates that are already open if you partner with traditional managers of size that have those partnerships. And so I do think, and we've already seen it, where some have actually proactively reached out with interest to partner and work with us because of that. They want access to something, but we can also get access to something from them as well. So it's mutual.
So that brings up a really interesting point. I've had both sides of this represented on the podcast. So I've had former CFO of Blackstone and the former chairman of EMEA for Hamilton Lane and an advisor to CVC. Obviously, they have their view and their side, which is that they think alt managers will win in the distribution game to advisors because they have the capabilities in private markets and the proven capabilities. Now, what they don't have is the brand, the longstanding brand with advisors. And I had Jenny Johnson, the CEO of Franklin Templeton, who obviously had her view on that, probably more in your camp, but I'd love to hear, I want to make sure we have both sides represented here, not just the alt side, but the traditional side. How do you think about why traditional managers have a shot at winning the distribution game in alts in the long term relative to the alternative asset managers?
I mean, so of course, being from a traditional asset manager, I have to represent my team, right? But I do think there's room for both to win, clearly. But if you consider the advisor consumer and the things they have to think about, they're really focused on key partners and less, not more. They really rely on those 5 to 7 key partners for everything that they want to do. So they're looking at those 5 firms to say, across those 5, every capability I want to tap into exists somewhere. And so that's going to be their first place they go. And they value, from a due diligence perspective, they know you, they know how you operate, how you think, they can anticipate and trust what you're going to do. So that is really valuable to advisors. So if you consider that and they know how you will help them with their end client, we already have that advantage. We don't have to build that credibility. We don't have to convince them through many different hoops that we're that person. We are already there, and that's a big advantage compared to alt specialty shops.
I think that's a really interesting point, that people will want a few solutions that they can go to, or maybe one solution that can do 5 or 7 different things. And I think that portends to the concept of the one-stop shop manager. I mean, even Apollo said this recently, that Mark Rowan was like, we want to even offer ETFs. Everything that's on a bank balance sheet is really private credit in our mind. That's a $40 trillion market that we can tap into. It does feel like everybody's kind of encroaching on each other's territory in one way or another. In your mind, paint us a picture for how that looks in 5 to 10 years as some of those things may unfold and shake out.
Like anything, I think there'll be winners and losers in this. And I do think you'll see the overall alts marketplace start to come towards the middle, because you're going to have both lean a little bit into spaces where they're not already and don't have the capabilities they want. I mean, certainly from a traditional asset manager, our biggest hurdle is the strength that alt specialist shops already have this capability. They know it well. We are trying to better understand that, get into that space. And so that's why you see a lot of traditional asset managers acquiring or partnering. That is the gap that we need to fill. We're going to start to have to come to the middle and then think about, how do we develop things that make sense to wealth management? And likewise, I think certainly not the Blackstones of the world, but for those smaller specialty shops, I think they're really going to have to think about how they start to come to the middle and likely do partner or think differently or offer other things beyond alts to look more like someone who can do more than one thing for an advisor.
How much do you think firms underestimate what it means to work with the wealth channel?
I think there's some underestimation in some of the hurdles that you have to clear to work with an advisor, because you're working with 2 people. You're working with the advisor, and then you're also working to ensure that they can successfully work with their end client. You have to think in terms of Not only how do you create a value proposition for advisors that is simple and clear and doesn't add work and time away from working with clients, but you also have to present it in a way that they can easily translate that value proposition to an end client. And in the case of alternatives, it's similar, but just different enough that the expectations that have been long known in every other type of thing that they've bought are going to feel different. So it's going to be really important to be able to help them, one, understand from an advisor perspective why I should take this on. They're interested, they want to. There's no question about the diversification and return on these things, but the how you implement it and how you convince someone who's been used to buying something that's daily liquid, for instance, is a hurdle that you are going to need to overcome. And some of the due diligence and reporting that has to happen with alternatives feels a bit more daunting and manual to advisors.
If you could wave your magic wand, and it could be around education, it could be around technology hurdles or ease of access, what would you say is the biggest missing piece to more advisor adoption of alts at this point?
So I would have said, if you gave me three things, those probably would have been the three I said. But I think the number one thing is around that education, because the sooner you can get advisors to really understand the benefit of alternatives and how it won't weigh them down, the more likely they will be to adopt it and then translate that to their clients. So educating them on operationally how there might be tech solutions to help them simplify operations. The sooner you can educate them on the risk reward here is around some of that lockup and illiquidity that feels different, gives you the reward.
What do you find has been the most effective form of education for advisors?
I would say it's still early days, at least from our specific experience, but conversations like bringing in specialists. We as a traditional asset manager also had to educate ourselves a bit on what does this mean and what will be required of us to really do this well. And we went the route of hiring Doug Keller, who I know you've met, as our head of sales for alternatives. And he's building a specialist team underneath him that'll work directly with our sales teams and advisors, bringing them in to have conversations about some of the things that might be perceived as challenging for advisors has really been the first step in getting some movement. Beyond that, I think it becomes, how do you help support training for their teams? How do you provide tools that they can access and or their end client can access? So you want to have mechanisms that the advisor can use, but also their end client. The first time I sat down with an alt specialist and said, help me understand the landscape, it was like learning a foreign language. I was like, you're going to have to back up. I don't know a lot of these terms. And end clients will feel that same way if you aren't thoughtful about how you simplify that and give them those tools.
You're the global head of products, so you probably think about, okay, what are the right products to create? How do we create those products? How do you think about product construction and managing both sides of it? There's the side of constructing a product for the end client that is successful in distribution, because people have to buy products that they want to buy and that are the right fit for them in a number of ways, not just from an investment perspective, but operationally. And then marrying that with the product construction from an investment perspective. How do you think about those two aspects?
Well, you absolutely have to think about both aspects. And it's glorious when they align. It's challenging when they don't. And I would say more often or not, it's somewhere in between. But the first thing we try to think about, it is really important to pull the client voice through. Given some of the partnership and relationship depth that we have with these advisor firms, we have access to what their strategic plans are longer term and can get a sense of what are you trying to achieve over the next 3 to 5 years and how will, in this case, alternatives help fill that gap for you. In those conversations, we can ask a lot of questions to understand where's their level of understanding, where's their level of tolerance and intolerance on what they're willing to do day one versus day two. So that's really helpful feedback to come back and say, okay, so what does that mean then to how we think about that from an investment capability and design build? Once we're back in house and we have that information, then we absolutely do have to think about structure. Again, it gets back to what are we able to do, what's feasible operationally, what is setting us up for success as a firm to be that reliable, consistent partner in delivering this product in the right way to the advisor. So all of that has to really come together. And specific to alts, we're right in the middle of figuring that out and learning and working on it. But you really do have to bring those two together. And in almost no case are you doing exactly what the client thinks they want, because there's what the client thinks they want, and then there's how you can address the actual need. I think that's the way we approach it, is let's engage to understand what you're really trying to seek to do and what are going to be the places that are burdensome for you. And then how do we think about that from a design mechanism to address those things that might look a little different than what you're thinking. We need to understand the symptoms, not the actual thing that you think it is.
On that point, what do you think has been the most challenging aspect of getting into private markets?
We mentioned one, just the general education of what it takes and the requirements to get in and how as a traditional asset manager, the things that we now need to think about from a construct standpoint, it's just different enough from most other stuff that we do that you can't just run it through a system and push play. We have to think about building teams differently, aligning people differently. And then the other piece is advisors are very interested in this, but we're already facing the challenge of, okay, so how do we get this pulled through? And how do we get the education and the connectivity? There's interest, which is great, but you still aren't seeing necessarily the ultra high net worth and high net worth coming in and buying a ton through advisors yet. So it's pent up. There seems to be interest, but it's like people aren't sure what it is yet. They're really attracted again to that return feature. But once you get into how it works and what's required, you get some hesitation. So that's the challenge that we're currently working through, is a little bit of internally, how do we keep it paced to evolve and match what's needed to be able to successfully deliver these, but also meet the advisor's needs.
What is your favorite or most interesting alternative investment going forward in a market that may be different than has been in the past?
I'm going to say two. It's maybe more of the application of alternatives that I'm really excited about. I think there's a really cool application to use alternatives in the retirement space in a different way. And also, I think there's a lot of cool things we could do in the ETF space. I think there's more than just applying the alternative strategy as we know it today. And I'm really excited about how we can pull it through into other kind of solutions in a new way to provide those returns.
I'm excited to see that come to fruition.
Yeah, me too.
Awesome. Well, Cheri, thanks so much for coming on this live episode of Alt Goes Mainstream.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Alt Goes Mainstream. I hope you enjoyed it. You can read more about alts at my Substack, altgoesmainstream.substack.com. Thanks a lot and have a great day.
We're